All right, and all of this game theory discussion has led us to this discussion of cartels, right? So this basically arises out of firms' desires, or perhaps the bank robbers' desires, to get to that better outcome where they are not going to jail for 5 years, or they're not earning the lower level of profit. And so this is particularly interesting with oligopoly because we see these things in real life, right? We actually do have cartels in real life. One of the famous ones is the oil cartel known as OPEC, the oil producing exporters. What does the C stand for? Can't remember what the C stands for. OPEC. Oh, oil. Um, Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries. There we go. Anyway, that's a real life example of a cartel. But a cartel is just an association of producers in an industry that agree to set common prices and output quotas in order to prevent competition. And I'll go even a step further than your slides. And they do this in order to increase prices, increase profits, and basically collectively act like a monopoly, even though there's not just one firm, there's several firms. So that's what a cartel is. Now, the rationale for a cartel, as well as the seeds for its undoing, if all the firms in an industry can find a way to cooperate and determine how much to produce in order to maximize their combined profits, right? So, in a sense, act jointly as a monopoly or act jointly as a single producer, that's the entire rationale. Hey, if we just act cooperatively, we can all increase our profits. Sounds great, right? Yeah, awesome. But this means that they have to collude with one another. They have to collude, which in the U.S. is illegal, by the way. But even if it were legal, it's still actually going to come undone because it's just a prisoner's dilemma. There's a dominant strategy to cheat or confess, as is the strategy in the prisoner's dilemma. So they act together to attain the same outcome of a monopoly producer. They maximize economic profits by restraining their production to a rate below the competitive output rate. Okay, so basically, in a graph, this is what it looks like. So here in this chart, here's the supply curve, which is the sum of their marginal cost curves. And so where supply equals demand, that would be the competitive outcome, right? This would be the competitive production, quantity production, and then this would be the competitive price at $5. But they come together and act like a monopoly, and so they set marginal cost equal to marginal revenue, right, to maximize profit. They restrict quantity so that they can charge a higher price, and that's basically the monopoly outcome. And then if we translate that back over here to each individual firm, you've got the marginal revenue for the firm is just the price that's charged that the cartel agrees on. So it's a flat curve basically. And so with the competitive outcome, there's zero economic profit, right? What we've seen with perfect competition. But if they all agree to charge the monopoly price, then they can charge a price that's above their average total cost. There's our profit per unit again. And then so total profit is that rectangle there, profit per unit times quantity. So that dashed or that lined rectangle is the firm's profit from collusion. But here's where it all comes undone, right? If they cheat and produce more rather than less, they can charge this price still because that's what they've agreed on, but sell more. And so that the firm can increase its profit by cheating. But if it cheats, the whole cartel comes undone, right? The whole thing unravels. It's a prisoner's dilemma. So that's why we learned the prisoner's dilemma. So there's this strong incentive to cheat, right? Even though there's this ability to earn profits by forming the cartel and colluding, but it involves a strong incentive to cheat, which often does happen. And we see this with OPEC, in fact. For some periods of time, they are able to collude and restrict their output, increase prices. But very frequently over their 40 or so years of existence, the cartel has fallen apart because one or more members ended up cheating. And then, they kind of have to regain each other's trust, and they end up, forming the cartel at some point again. But it kind of goes through cycles, interestingly. So, like I said, cartel members face this huge temptation to cheat on the arrangement because they could increase their profits if they cheat. Um, each individual member could theoretically increase its revenues and profits by charging a slightly lower price than the cartel, raising its production, and selling more units. Now, if the cheating firm is to raise their production, the market price would decrease, leading to lower revenue and profits for all firms. And then the cartel begins to unravel because once one firm cheats, the other ones then say, well, if you're going to cheat, there's no reason for me to restrict my quantity. I'm going to cheat too. They all begin cheating, and they end up actually getting really close to the competitive, perfectly competitive outcome because they all start really competing, even though there's not a lot of firms. So that's actually why, perhaps in the real world, empirically, we don't see a lot of inefficiency in resource misallocation, even when there's oligopoly, because there's actually still a lot of competitive forces at play, even though there's relatively few firms. Now, there's some ways that they try to enforce the cartel arrangements, and there are sort of 4 conditions that make it more likely that a cartel will be able to sustain itself and continue to restrain output and detect cheating and these sorts of things. So, if there's a small number of firms, then it's easier to detect cheaters and kind of smoke them out. It's easier if they have relatively undifferentiated products. So oil is a very good example, right? It helps if prices are easily observable, another way to sort of detect cheaters. And it also helps if there's very small variations in price. If there's no variation in price, even better, because again, it's very easy to detect cheaters when you see a price that's lower than what should be the cartel price. So all of these things mainly have to do with the ability to find and smoke out cheaters. But like we've been discussing, cartels usually break down. And studies, in fact, have shown that most cartel arrangements do not last more than 10 years. In many cases, the cartel agreements break down even quicker than that. And one reason the cartels tend to break down is that the economic profits that existing firms obtain from holding prices above competitive levels provide an incentive for new firms to enter the market. So if there aren't really high barriers to entry, new firms enter to seek out these high profits. Now, variations in overall economic activity also tend to make cartels unsustainable. So the fact that we have, recessions and booms, right? It's really enticing to cheat when there's a recession going on and profits are low, right? So that's basically what that last bullet point's talking about. Okay, so you're not responsible for this section. Don't worry about section 5 on network effects. I'm not worried about you knowing that, okay? So we're just going to skip over that. If you're interested, go ahead and read it. It is interesting, but I'm not going to make you responsible for it.